Three. Welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. We've got a super exciting episode lined up for you. We've got to give a huge shout out to the folks that make this possible over at the Science Policy Action Network, your one-stop shop for everything innovation. Things are moving at a breakneck pace. The world is changing around you. If you ever need somebody to hold your hand and walk you into tomorrow or help you plan for today, look no further than the Science Policy Action Network. That's span-inc.org. Again, that's span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, let's get right into our episode because we have a very amazing guest with us today. We have Christine John Fuller, Executive Director, Alzheimer's Association, Eastern North Carolina Chapter. Christine, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's an honor to be with you.
Yes. Now, you are the executive director of the Eastern North Carolina chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So perhaps let's start there. What is the Alzheimer's Association and what is Alzheimer's?
Yeah, well, I'll kind of give you the framework of the association from a national level down to a local level, if that helps. So, we are the leading voluntary health organization around Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. We cover literally every state in the country, but we have a global footprint of what we do to be able to move the needle in research, to be able to care and support for individuals that are impacted. But that literally comes down to having boots on the ground within our own local communities. So here in North Carolina, we serve an estimated 200 nearly 211,000 individuals that are living with the disease, age 65 plus, and they are taken care of by roughly about 381,000 friends and families who are caregivers on the front lines. And we do that through two chapters that we have here locally. I am the executive director for the Eastern North Carolina chapter, which essentially I tell everybody, if you think kind of east of Moore County to the coast up and down, that's us. And then we have a sister chapter that is our Western Carolina chapter, that is all of the other part of the state. But we really work intimately. In fact, we have a lot of staff that cross over the lines and work for both. And we really make sure that we are not only, as we talked about, identifying ways in which we can be the leader in funding research, nonprofit leader in funding research for Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, but also in identifying ways that we can continue to provide community support and programming for individuals who are impacted by the disease here. And so we do that in a myriad of ways. We have offices throughout the state, and then we also have staff that are embedded throughout the state that are in community every single day, making sure that we are bringing the support and the resources that we have right to the individuals who need it most.
So the people who need it most, I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong, are members of the community who are older. Is Alzheimer's a disease that's tightly associated with age, or can anyone develop the disease Alzheimer's?
I love that you asked that because I will kind of debunk some myths here with that. The reality is, raise your hand if you have a brain, right? Like, might be questionable depending on the day and how you feel. But after a long day, like a week like this, I might feel opposite of that. But we all have the possibility of developing Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. The important thing to remember is, while age is the largest risk factor, that kind of 65 plus is really the largest risk factor, it is not the only factor. And dementia is not a normal part of aging. And so the important part to remember is, majority of individuals that diagnosed might be 65 plus, but we have 200,000 people nationally that are estimated to be living with younger onset Alzheimer's, meaning before the age of 65. I was in DC this week with individuals that were diagnosed in their 50s. So the important part is, one, while diagnosis might happen in that later range, the important thing is we know that a disease like Alzheimer's, and you asked a little bit earlier, I realized I didn't answer what Alzheimer's is, but we know that you can start to see indications of the disease from brain change standpoint 20 years before diagnosis. So we're talking far before an aging demographic from that standpoint. So going back to your question about what Alzheimer's is, I think the important thing to always talk about is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, and start with the fact that when you think about dementia itself, think about it as kind of an umbrella term for describing loss of cognitive function, if that makes sense. And so Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, and it's really just a general term for memory loss or other loss of other cognitive abilities that are serious enough to interfere with daily life. So Alzheimer's accounts for roughly about 60, 80 to 80% of of dementia cases. So when we talk about Alzheimer's disease, it's a progressive disease that can affect memory, thinking, and behavior. But then, and I think this is the key piece, a lot of people think that's where it stops, right? And yes, there is a devastating component to the loss of person and the memory in those pieces. But those symptoms continue. They eventually grow severe enough that they cause major behavioral changes, that they interfere with daily tasks. So everything from self-care to toileting to, real, even in the latest stages of the disease, trouble swallowing and eating. So there are very serious consequences to the disease far beyond just the memory loss itself from that standpoint.
So if I'm an individual and I'm in my 50s or in my 60s, how would I notice that I may be experiencing some of the early onset signs of, of Alzheimer's? I mean, is it a situation where, and I don't know if this is the best way to ask it, but please forgive me. Is it a situation where sometimes the last person to know is the person that is experiencing symptoms? And if that is the case, what are some tips that everybody could possibly take in to maybe notice if their own cognitive function is slipping? I mean, that seems like a hard thing for an individual to notice about themselves, is it?
You know what? I think that's an interesting question. And what I would say to this is there's a couple of different things to think about in that regard. So, one, when I talked about that there can be brain changes 20 years prior to diagnosis, some of that is asymptomatic. You're not noticing anything. The brain changes that are starting that may not be manifesting in a way that is even identifiable yet from that standpoint. I think the second thing is also whether it is Alzheimer's, whether it is another disease state or a comorbidity that someone might have, sometimes it depends on the person and how attuned they are with their own health, their willingness to address health concerns from that standpoint. So, in the same sense that someone might have symptoms of maybe heart complications, or there's clearly the possibility, or they're pre-diabetic, there are things that maybe they are addressing or they're choosing to not address, is part of it. So one, across the board, we should be listening to our bodies, and what we know, what is good for the body is good for the brain from that standpoint. So if we can be attuned to that, I think the important things are to remember, one, that in all stages of this of life, you can be doing things that can lower your risk, from being active to challenging yourself and your brain to making healthy lifestyle decisions about diet and exercise, to identifying and staying social from that standpoint, things that will help keep your brain and body healthy as you age. The other piece of that that I would say is then, as you age, there are things that all of us, regardless of whether we have a family history or not, can know about the disease that can help us keep an eye on it. Now, I know more about those myself, not just because of the role that I play, but because I had a great grandfather, a grandmother, an aunt, and now an uncle who all have been impacted in some way. And we're monitoring my father. So for me, all of those pieces means that I have a keen eye for them and also my own health. But things that people can think about are, when it comes to cognitive health and functioning, think about highly stressful times. Maybe you're in your 40s or 50s, like you mentioned, and you're going through highly stressful times and you have cognitive fog. Those are things that might just be, I'm exhausted, I have a lot going on, gosh, I've been sitting in front of a computer for too long. There's stress related pieces that might not be related to it at all. So those are important things to know, and know the difference between not normal aging or something else going on. However, it's also important to realize that those could be lifestyle decisions or things that could be adding to your risk factor, long-term stress, things that might be impacting your possibility of developing the disease. But when it comes to knowing those symptoms, it's very different. You can have everything from someone who maybe, if we talk about knowing the 10 signs, you might have individuals who have been excellent cooks, and they've done the same recipes by memory for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden their recipes seem off, and you've noticed at family functions this isn't how it used to taste, or they added too much of something or put salt instead of sugar in it. Things that are off, or maybe they were ferocious readers and all of a sudden they've stopped reading, right? So there's some great know the 10 signs that we offer. You can go to alz.org and you can look at those 10 signs, and it will talk about it. It's not a concern if you happen to forget the name of somebody. It happens. I can be in a room and forget the name of my cousin standing next to me. But if you start to see someone who's exhibiting things like they hold a pen and they can't say the word pencil, so they have to describe it, and that's happening more often with things around them, that might be an indication. So we really work to identify those things for ourselves, in our own selves, and in the people around us.
So you really, and forgive me, because as you're speaking, so many thoughts rush into my head, so many considerations. Because one of the things that I started thinking about as you were talking, just then, is that support network, right? Um, you were talking about the folks around, you start noticing if food changes or following recipes or somebody's not able to describe a pen. All right, so an individual um, is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. First of all, how is, and forgive me, how is Alzheimer's diagnosed? Like, how is it differentially determine that? Because it's like 60 to 70% of all dementia is Alzheimer's. How do they determine what's this 70% and what's the 30% that's not Alzheimer's? What are some of the tests and how is it determined?
Well, I first and foremost will always say this. I will give kind of a more generic, that's probably audience friendly answer to this, but I will remind people I'm not a clinician. So we are lucky to work alongside brilliant healthcare providers and individuals within that space. But what I will share with this is essentially, if people are exhibiting signs, the thing for the individual themselves or their family member or with their family need to be asking is going to their healthcare provider. Many times that is your primary care physician, and asking for a cognitive assessment. Now, technically, at the age of 65, a cognitive assessment should be offered at every annual at any an annual review that you might have with your physician. However, that doesn't necessarily always translate. Our research shows that there is a great majority of healthcare professionals who are waiting for the family to mention cognitive concerns, and the family is waiting for the the physician to ask about it, and so the conversation is never happening. So in doing that, they would go through a kind of a battery of tests that is doing everything from kind of some memory recall to some visual drawings, various different things that can assess if possibly something is going on from there. If that indicates that there might be something, then you're on the path towards testing that might take place to be able to identify if there is some sort of hallmark of the disease that the individual has. So, again, that might be looking at something like a PET scan, a lumbar puncture, and newest to the arsenal of the ways that we test. The FDA just cleared our first ever blood biomarker test that can be done in a clinical setting, that would show the hallmarks of the disease and help maybe move people faster in through the diagnosis process. Now, that's very new. It can't be found in every physician's office at this point. There's clinical guidelines around it that have to be worked on, but this is a huge step forward, as you can imagine, as we put this into place for maybe places where there's a neurology desert, or the closest neurologist is several hours away, and they can get that first indicating test done in a primary care physician's office and move them quicker into a specialist hands to be able to take the conversation from there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And also thank you for just being like, listen, I'm not a physician. That's also like a really, really a huge thing. And just to remind folks, we have the opportunity, honor, and privilege to be talking with Christine John Fuller, Executive Director, Alzheimer's Association, Eastern North Carolina chapter. And so what I was kind of getting to with the caretakers and caregivers involved with, Alzheimer's disease is it must be pretty tough. It must be pretty tough, maybe just emotionally watching someone you love change. You just described recipes, and I know it's very easy to describe that, but so much of how we appreciate someone, each other, is around food. And oftentimes, so much of who someone is the meals that they prepare for you. I'm just going to be honest. Some of my fondest memories of families are functions around food, and so I know that's a huge thing. But not even talking about that emotional toll, just the toll it must take in caring for an individual who is dealing with Alzheimer's. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the stories you've heard and perhaps some tips you have out there for maybe someone who has just become a caregiver?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, kind of looking at numbers, we talked about that 381,000 family caregivers here in North Carolina. Nationally, that is roughly about 12 million individuals who are providing unpaid care. One of the things I like to do is frame it in kind of what that cost looks like. So first and foremost, when we talk about cost, the total lifetime care for someone living with dementia is estimated at about $400,000, with 70% of those costs being borne by the family caregivers in forms of unpaid caregiving out of pocket expenses. So I say that to set the stage for the fact that we know that there is such a time, emotion, investment in what we do as caregivers, and the stats are staggering, from the understanding of how many more hours dementia caregivers have to put into caring for someone living with the disease, to the impact it has if they're still working. Maybe they're sandwich generation and they are taking care of individuals that are, they're taking care of their kids, and they're taking care of maybe a parent that is living with the disease, that are impacted in ways that they're maybe having to take time off from work, reduce hours, step away from work to care for someone living with the disease. That adds an even more economical and emotional and relational strain on what is going on from that standpoint. So we also then know, because of that strain, the physical toll on caregivers and the stats around caregiver health themselves is staggering. And it is devastating to hear stories when we have families, like I have a family from the Winston-Salem area, and there he talks about the fact that he had two parents, one living with the disease, one that was caregiving, and he knows that the rapid loss of one parent after they lost the individual living with Alzheimer's, the other parent actually passed away of health complications shortly after, and he can pinpoint the stress that it took to be a caregiver as to the decline of that second parent. So deeply, deeply impacting families from that standpoint. And it is not just the caregiver that's on the front lines, it can be everyone. It can be caregivers that are trying to do that from afar or who aren't necessarily there, and how do they navigate that to the dynamics of how their villages are able to support them, which can be incredibly important. But then think about individuals who don't have a village around them. How do they find that respite care? How do they find the resources that they need as caregivers?
Um, a quick question that I have is, you're in Eastern North Carolina, and I know North Carolina as a whole is really big in research. And there's amazing research going on all over the country. I mean, I'm from North Carolina, so I'm a bit biased. You're from North Carolina too?
I am not from North Carolina, but I have been here now almost 2 decades. So maybe
We'll
you'll
take you.
invite me into the club.
We'll take you. We'll take you. You're North Carolina. Yeah, you're North Carolinian now. But what is it like to be in a state that does a lot of research? And I know they do Alzheimer's research. I've had the fortune of being part of a research group. I didn't do Alzheimer's research myself, but the group did Alzheimer's research. What is it like, and is it a benefit specifically to be in North Carolina doing the type of work that you currently do? And no shade on other states, but what are some
Right.
unique characteristics of North Carolina to make it a cool place to work in this type of
Yeah,
work?
I couldn't agree more. And I would tell you this, that so while we have an incredibly, incredibly robust research funding program that we have, I'm very proud to say that North Carolina holds one of the institutions that's getting the most funding currently, which is Wake Forest University out of Winston-Salem. However, Duke, UNC, even ECU, we have tons of research institutions that are doing dementia science research, which is incredible. So, what it means is not only do we have them paving the way for national or international breakthroughs in what we're doing, I think it's important to remember that research isn't always about treatment. So, while I would love to touch on just in a minute about the advances that we've had in the last couple of years and how monumental that is, but when we think about research, a lot of time we just think about drugs, treatment, right? I always like to remind people that research is about so much more than just that. So, yes, we're looking at identifying ways that we can understand more about the disease scientifically, and how we can then use that to be able to identify how we reduce the risk or find a possible cure one day or slow the progression of the disease. But it's also research on things like that blood test that I mentioned. And there's research on when is the right time to intervene with that testing, or to think about how you could use multiple treatments together for a new opportunity in treatment. Also around just even again caregiving health or any of these other things that impact what is going on from that standpoint, dementia navigation and care, all these pieces. So we're very proud of that. We have some amazing things in our we have two Alzheimer's disease research centers here in North Carolina. One is the Duke UNC ADRC, and the other one is at Wake Forest, and they do incredible work around um, studies related to Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Individuals within our own backyards are benefiting from the amazing work that they're doing in brain health, in treatment of Alzheimer's, in dementia navigation. And we're very lucky to have those here for folks to be able to tap into.
That's absolutely incredible. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to be involved with this type of work. And so let's ask, what is it like for you to do the work that you do? And maybe back up a little bit. I you're North Carolinian now, but where do you originally hail from? And how did you come to be the executive director of the Eastern North Carolina chapter of the Alzheimer's Association? Yeah, a little bit about the person behind the work. The work is fantastic, but the people doing the work are also fantastic. So yeah, how did you get into this type of work?
Well, thank you. And I do agree that the people behind it are fantastic because I work alongside really fantastic, brilliant people every single day. And so I will tell you, again, I was born in Wisconsin, grew up in Georgia. I am sorry to say, a proud University of Georgia grad. Go dogs. However, my path was really around, I knew that community and nonprofit work was in my blood, from civic and youth organization things that I did in high school that I then became a volunteer for while I was in college. I actually graduated with a degree in advertising, so around marketing and PR and all those pieces. However, I quickly found my way back to working within nonprofit in youth programming, in the state of Georgia. And then I actually had something very fortuitous happen, which was, when I was at the University of Georgia, I was part of a student run PR firm, and one of our clients was the National MS Society, multiple sclerosis, and we helped organize the MS walk they were having in Athens, Georgia at the time. So I remember being real proud of that $6,000 that we raised in Athens, for the walk that year, and it got me a taste of like what voluntary health organization work looked like. From that, again, I took a path and I was a assistant secretary for a U.S. senator for a hot minute, and I started working within the youth programming, and then I found my way to the National MS Society actually, and I worked there for several years in their fund development aspect. So it was around their walks, their cycling events that they did, and engaging in how we fuel the mission through funding it from that standpoint. Um, the the by a lot of fortuitous different aspects, I was looking to make a move to be closer to my now husband in the Charlotte area, and I stepped into a CEO role for the Lupus Foundation of America, in which I took that base knowledge and understanding of a voluntary health organization and be able to got to put my fingerprints on an organization that really was growing. It was serving 13 counties, wanted to grow the statewide organization, and that's where I learned about the 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 community education piece of that, how we delivered our support services throughout the community, which was a beautiful marriage of that. And then after nearly a decade of being there, I took a step and I moved towards the Alzheimer's Association, which had been very personal to me, as I mentioned earlier, and took a role in which I've been in now for a little over 8 years. And I've been in the role from the executive director piece a little over a year, but I've been with the association, for many more years than that. And it really is about, it is not an easy career path. I will tell everyone that. They A lot of people ask me, "Oh, so do you get paid for doing?" I'm like, or is that a real job? Is it a full-time job? I'm like, it's actually probably four full-time jobs if you think about it from the amount of work we do. But it is, the nonprofit field is filled with brilliant, passionate, hardworking individuals who are wanting to address the gaps in our communities in so many different ways, and getting to do that alongside volunteers who are truly just as dedicated and just as brilliant, and wanting to help find answers to solutions. And for me, especially within that health space of how we take care of families impacted by disease, in ways that obviously can categorically change people's lives.
Well, thank you so much for your service. I can hear it in your voice that this is work that you are absolutely passionate about, and it's work that is very much needed because the prevalence, if I understand correctly, of Alzheimer's is increasing. So
Hmm.
now more than ever, this work is needed. But there's ways that folks can get involved with supporting the Alzheimer's Association. Are there ways that folks can support you in the work that the Alzheimer's Association, the Eastern North Carolina chapter, are there ways that folks can support that work, and how can they support the work of the Alzheimer's Association at large?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go back to a phrase that you just used, which is now more than ever. I feel like maybe you even saw one of our big promotions right now, and that stuck in your brain. So I'm gonna hope that is the case, and that's sticking in the brains of others. But in the last 3 or 4 years, we've essentially had two FDA approved treatments, first ever, that are disease modifying, slow the progression of the disease. Before that, all of our treatments were addressing the symptoms of the disease. We've never had this before. Monumental change in how we can support people. But these treatments are actually only for the earliest stages of the disease. So, mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease, earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease is a very small window, which means now we have to work on early detection and early diagnosis, or people will miss that window. So, we're looking at other treatments, but we know more than ever, now more than ever, we have to be investing in research. We have to be in our own backyards, letting people know the symptoms of this disease, letting them know that this assumption that, well, I have it, there's nothing they can do, why would I worry about getting a diagnosis of dementia or finding out what there are opportunities to give someone that is diagnosed with the disease quality of life, more time with their loved ones, dignity throughout the process. So that's why we're here now more than ever is important to do that. So the way that people can do that are a lot of different things, whether it be here in North Carolina or beyond. Here you can go to alz.org and you can actually find out about our two chapters there, in North Carolina, again, Eastern North Carolina or Western Carolina. You can also, this is the most important thing I can probably say today. We have a 24-hour, 7-day a week helpline that is staffed by colleagues of mine that are master's level care clinicians, and they are specialists in dementia navigation. And so you can talk through with them about a variety of disease related issues. So that number is 800 272 3900. I'll say that one more time: 1-800-272-3900. And that is a critically important number for people to remember in doing that. But they can get help, but they can also get involved. We need volunteers every single day in every pocket of what we do. We need advocates. I was in Capitol Hill this week with 30 advocates from around North Carolina, 1,100 from across the state, who are willing to tell their story with elected officials so we can move public policy. We need advocates to be able to be trained to go out and give awareness programs, to be trained to give community education programs. We need volunteers to be a part of our fundraising initiatives. We have 17 walks across North Carolina, 5 of which are in the eastern side of the state. We have a campaign that's kind of a do it yourself campaign that is across the state of North Carolina. We need individuals to be fundraisers or to say, I want to help in my local community, bring people to the table and get them to a local walk. So there are lots of ways to do that. Again, go to the alz.org website, could also go to that 800 number and get connected to be able to be a part of what we're doing and really engaging. So we call them volunteers, but they're truly mission motivators, and they help us deliver our mission. We are a voluntary empowered organization, which means we cannot do it without volunteers helping us be able to be. We can't have a staff member in all 100 counties, so but we can have volunteers in all 100 counties of what we do.
Wow, that was absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. One more time, what is that number? One more time for the 24-hour help hotline.
Absolutely. 800-272-3900. Again, 800-272-3900.
Yes, this is Christine John Fuller, Executive Director, Alzheimer's Association, Eastern North Carolina chapter. Uh, Listen, I am extraordinarily fortunate to be able to host this podcast. It gives me the honor to talk to the most amazing individuals in the world, and you were now added to that list, but it's a gift and a curse because um, time goes by just like that. And at the end of every conversation, I end up kicking myself, wishing I would have asked this question or wishing I would have asked that question. And perhaps when you were coming into this, maybe you were thinking, like, oh, I'm going to prepare for this because I know he's going to ask that. And I'm sorry if I didn't ask that key question, but this is an opportunity for you as I turn the tables a little bit. What question should I have asked you? And after you ask that question, go ahead and answer it. I know it's a bit of a hot seat question. If you don't have one, that's fine. But I like to ask that question of every one of my guests. What question should I have asked you?
It is an excellent question. Let me see if I can think about what it might be, but um maybe it would just be if there is one thing that you can do to help impact your communities locally when it comes to this, is telling the story that we exist. I was a family that went through this. My grandmother lived with us until she needed full-time care. So I was a teenage caregiver, and I tell people all the time, I did not know the Alzheimer's Association existed. We did it on our own, and it was very, very difficult. So, if it's just simply someone heard this and tells someone that mentions Alzheimer's dementia that the association exists, and more importantly, that they can help point towards local resources, give them tips and guidance in their journey. We want people to know that we are here for them. So that's the most important thing that you could have probably asked me, and that we could share at the end of this conversation, is just make sure you tell people about the association and how we can support them.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that question. And yes, please, 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 not only visit the Alzheimer's Association, whether it's on their website or their hotline, but also if you have the bandwidth and the availability and the drive, contribute, volunteer, but more importantly, let folks know that the Alzheimer's Association exists. I will do what I can because I had the opportunity to meet you, Christine. I thank you so much, not only for your time, but one question. Oh gosh, I should have asked. That messed up my whole flow of this outro. I had it just perfectly, but then it popped into my head. Is Alzheimer's hereditary?
That's a great question, and a common question. So from a genetic standpoint, you don't necessarily obviously have to have it in your family, but there are genetic predispositions that can possibly lead to the a greater chance of having the disease. And there are some individuals who have a genetic makeup that means that there is not only the chance of that they will get it, but I have friends that have a certain mutation that means it's not a matter of whether they will get it, it's a matter of when they will get it, because they know the path for their family, and with that genetic mutation is that they will develop the disease. So we also on our website have really great information on heredity and genetics, to help people understand a little bit more about that and what they can know about their own family history and how that might play into their risk for the disease.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There you have it. Please, please, please visit the website, learn as much as you can. When you learn, tell others about the Alzheimer's Association, volunteer. Again, we've had Christine John Fuller, Executive Director, Alzheimer's Association, Eastern North Carolina chapter. Thank you so very much for what you do and being with us today. Thank each and every one of you who tuned in to check us out. Be sure to share and comment, share your experiences, let other folks know about the Alzheimer's Association. Huge shout out to the Science Policy Action Network for making this podcast possible. And remember, the future isn't something to wait for, it is something to build. I'm your host, Richard Watkins. Thank you all so very much. Have a great one. Take care.